The billionaire wanted the tree delivered by the full moon. He wanted it perfect, flawless, and most importantly, nameless. But Elias, the nursery worker, saw the tiny, almost erased initials on the tree tag. Initials that belonged to a child that vanished 30 years ago. Elias spent his life curating order. His world was the nursery, a silent, patient realm of roots and soil, where growth was predictable and truth was in the leaf. He was a simple nursery worker at Arbor Vitae, one of the most exclusive plant suppliers in the world. He understood silence. The silence of growing things, the silence of deeply held secrets. One Tuesday, an unprecedented commission arrived from Alexander Rexford, the titan of Rexford Pharmaceuticals. The order was for a single mature Japanese black pine, an extremely rare, 30-year-old specimen known for its dense, knotty trunk. It was a tree that demanded respect, a silent monument to 3 decades of endurance. Alexander Rexford, I want that pine delivered and installed on the rooftop garden of my Manhattan headquarters by Saturday. No delays, no excuses. I need the specimen cataloged as Rexford Private Collection, Specimen 1, no other markings. Understand? I want it flawless. The urgency was odd. The secrecy was typical of the Rexford name, but the need for anonymity, for a deliberate erasure of the tree's history, felt almost aggressive. When Elias went to prepare the ancient pine for transport, he felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He was transferring more than just a plant. He was transferring a relic. He began the detailed process of inspecting the trunk. He ran his calloused fingers over the thick, furrowed bark. That's when he noticed it a plastic identification tag, almost completely absorbed by the tree's protective growth, fused into the bark near the base. It had been crudely scratched, likely years ago, an amateur attempt to remove it entirely. But in the late afternoon sun, catching the light just so, Elias could make out 2 tiny, faint initials, LWAND below them, an etched number, 090494. A standard nursery code was never that specific. The last number 94 usually denoted the year planted, 1994. The specimen was 30 years old, matching the pine's age. But what about LW? And why would a code be scratched off this meticulously, only for the tag itself to be left behind? It was a defiant act of memory against an attempt at erasure. Elias felt a profound sense of responsibility, as if the tree itself was speaking to him through that tiny, faded plastic dot. Elias spent his lunch break researching old local archives, the faint scent of pine needles still on his clothes. He used the digital archives of the city library, cross-referencing 1994, missing children, initials LW, and the date. The internet returned a cold, devastating result. 30 years ago, the 5-year-old son of a prominent, but now forgotten, rival pharmaceutical family, the Wells family, vanished. His name, Leo Wells. The date of his disappearance, September 4th, 1994. Elias stared at the pine's tag. 90,494. The last remnant of a missing child was not a toy or a photograph. It was a faint registration number on a tree tag, the tree planted on the exact day Leo vanished. It was an impossible, sickening coincidence. The date was too precise. The initials were too perfect. He dug deeper into the physical records of Arbor Vitae from 1994. The old, leather-bound order book confirmed his worst fears. The Wells family had commissioned a memorial grove, a symbolic act of planting life when life was lost. A massive, emotional gesture intended to honor their missing son. But the order showed only 9 trees delivered, not 10. The final 10th tree, the Japanese black pine, had been diverted to the Rexford family estate, already owned by Alexander Rexford's father, the original founder. Alexander Rexford hadn't just taken the pine. He had stolen a victim's memory, hidden it in plain sight for 3 decades, and planted it as a perverse trophy on his own land. The tree was not a monument to life. It was a memorial to a crime. Elias tried to report the connection to the local police department, but without concrete evidence linking the pine to Rexford's direct involvement, the lead detective dismissed it as circumstantial and the ravings of an overly imaginative gardener. Elias was running out of time. The tree was scheduled for transport the next morning, Friday, ahead of the Saturday installation. Once that pine was installed on Rexford's private rooftop, the truth would be sealed forever beneath billions of dollars of corporate power. Then, a handwritten note, folded meticulously, appeared on his locker. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The note led Elias to a small, secluded retirement home on the edge of the city, a place Rexford would never think to look. There he found Clara Vance, a woman with eyes that held 30 years of sorrow. Clara was Leo Wells's childhood nanny, fired and silenced shortly after the boy disappeared. She was our gardener, holding the fragile seed of truth. Elias, Miss Vance? I'm Elias. I believe you have information about Leo Wells, the 10th tree. It has a tag, 090494. Clara's lips trembled slightly, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. Clara Vance. Her voice is weary, low. Alexander Rexford stole that boy, Elias, not for ransom, not for money immediately. He stole him for science, for power. Leo's father, Wells Sr., was close to inventing a life-saving pharmaceutical formula, the very one that now forms the backbone of the Rexford empire. When Wells refused to sell the patent, Alexander took Leo. It was a final, cold-blooded act of corporate sabotage. He planted that tree to mark the crime, using the child's ID number as a cruel signature of his victory over the Wells family. Rexford wanted his former rival to always know who won. Elias, how can you be certain? He claimed the patent was his own research. Clara Vance, I was the one who kept the original file, the one detailing every child in the Wells family's private medical registry, the original nursery registration. She slowly pulls out an old, brittle index card, protected inside a plastic sleeve. This card confirms that 090494 was Leo's unique registration code used in all his early medical records. When Rexford's company filed their patent on the formula, they used that very same number to catalog their research, claiming Leo's father's work as their own. The Wells name was erased, and Leo was never seen again. I tried to speak out, Elias. 30 years ago, I went to the police. Alexander used his influence. They called me unstable. I lost my job, my reputation. I had to disappear. Clara, the gardener, had kept the one piece of paper that proved the connection, the single seed of truth that survived the corporate fire. She had hidden it, hoping one day someone with clean hands would find it. Clara Vance, I can't go public. Elias, Alexander ruined my life 30 years ago when I tried to speak out. But the tree is leaving the nursery. The window is closing. You must be the one to plant this seed. The police won't listen unless the tree, the evidence, is physically connected to this registration card. You understand roots. You understand truth growing from the soil. Elias looked from the old woman's resolute face to the fragile, life-altering index card. He was not a detective, not a spy. He was a nursery worker. But the injustice, the deliberate cruelty of Rexford's signature on that tree galvanized him. He had to be the one to complete the harvest. Elias knew the plan had to be flawless. Alexander Rexford was holding a major press conference at his Manhattan headquarters on Saturday, a celebration of his new, multi-billion-dollar R&D wing located on the rooftop, the same rooftop where the pine would be installed. It was the stage for his final triumphant lie. Elias had access to the transport team. He requested the final check on the tree's root ball. claiming a need to stabilize the steel cage for the crane lift. Under the cover of a thick fog that rolled in just before midnight, Elias worked. He wore thick gloves, his movements silent and practiced. The Japanese black pine, now crated and ready for transport, sat massive and imposing in the gloom. Elias used specialized tools to temporarily loosen a section of the steel cage around the root ball. He placed Clara's original index card, carefully sealed in a thick, waterproof capsule deep inside the fibrous, tangled roots connecting the stolen identity to the stolen tree, and thus, to Alexander Rexford's crime. Elias, VO, a tree is evidence. The roots will keep the secret safe. They always do. The next day, Elias contacted the City Regulatory Affairs Office anonymously, citing a specific section of the city code regarding unverified botanical specimens used in corporate patent disputes. He didn't mention the child, only the numbers, and provided the original Wells family order number as reference. He knew that the evidence he planted had to be discovered by a neutral party. The Manhattan rooftop glittered on Saturday afternoon. Alexander Rexford was at the podium, his voice booming across the city skyline, basking in the applause of investors. Beside him, in a massive planter, stood the Japanese black pine specimen 1. Alexander Rexford. And this tree, this ancient specimen, represents the deep, resilient roots of the Rexford legacy, built on innovation, integrity, and decades of ethical growth. We stand today on solid ground. As Rexford was mid-speech, a team of official-looking men, including the Chief of Regulatory Affairs, stormed the rooftop. They moved with a quiet, efficient urgency that cut through the champagne-fueled celebration. They carried a warrant for a regulatory inspection. Regulatory Chief, Mr. Rexford. We have an injunction to seize this specimen. Alexander Rexford. His face turns to granite, his voice low with fury. On what grounds? This is my private property. This is ridiculous. Regulatory Chief. We have reason to believe this tree is connected to a 30-year-old missing persons case and the fraudulent filing of Patent 741. We need to examine the original identification markings on the root system. Immediately. Rexford shouted, claiming sabotage, corporate espionage, and slander. But the chief pointed to the tree's trunk, where Elias's meticulous work had left the faint markings visible. Regulatory Chief, the faint initials LW and the number 090494 are visible. Mr. Rexford, these match the missing child's known medical registration number, which also appears on the original patent filing you claimed as your own. We believe the full original evidence, a registration card, is encased deep in the root ball. The crowd gasped. The moment the chief mentioned the root system and the registration card, Alexander Rexford's composure shattered. He knew that only 2 people knew about that card, Clara Vance and the person she had entrusted. He realized his own nanny, the silent gardener, had finally found the tool to uproot him. Rexford didn't argue further. He confessed to planting the pine to mock the family he had ruined and using the child's ID number as a perverse signature of his triumph. Leo Wells, sadly, was never found. But the truth of the Rexford fortune's rotten source was finally revealed. Rexford Pharmaceuticals collapsed under the weight of the scandal and the regulatory fines. The Wells family's name was cleared, and the patent was transferred to a charitable foundation, where the life-saving formula could finally help people ethically. Weeks later, Elias visited Clara at the retirement home. He brought her a cutting from the memorial grove. Clara Vance. Clara is sitting in a sunlit conservatory, looking peaceful. We planted the truth, Elias, and now the true memory of Leo Wells can finally grow, not as a secret, but as an honor. The Wells family has their dignity back. Elias, I'm glad you held on to the seed. Ms. Vance, you risked everything. Clara Vance, I was just the gardener. Elias. My job was to make sure the soil was right for someone like you to find it and make it grow. You are the harvester. Elias, the nursery worker, became a quiet hero of integrity. Clara Vance, the gardener, finally found peace, knowing the poisoned roots of the Rexford dynasty had been pulled out. The biggest secrets are often not kept in vaults, but hidden in plain sight, protected by the very hands that tend to life.